All right, welcome everybody to the January 31st SIG API Machinery meeting. We are recording and we have a full agenda and we're closer to on time than usual. So hopefully we can get through the whole thing. Okay, David, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So over the past couple weeks, someone from Hawaii, Tiger Zhu, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, has been making a set of polls to make it easier to configure admission, and has introduced the idea of a default sorting for admission plugins, and everything up to this point makes sense. No behavior has changed at all. And now there's a poll to have a default list of admission plugins that you would just get normally running Kube API server, and in his proposal with no flags. The admission control flag would still be respected as it is today. And Daniel, you had said you're not sure you're ready to turn that on by default. I'm willing to have a disable admission flag because today that's what it means if you don't specify anything. And I'm willing to have a default admission flag. And for this release, I could even see defaulting it to true if you wanted to. Although people whose clusters have no admission are getting really unusual behavior.
Yeah. So, I guess, do we know how many of those people there are? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are we going to cause more problems than we solve by defaulting this on?
I don't think so, because if someone doesn't have something that makes sure namespaces exist before they create namespace resources, which is an admission plugin, or they don't have an admission plugin that assigns service accounts to their pods, really, really weird stuff happens.
Do we not have a default for the admission, for the existing admission flag?
No.
You don't have a default at all?
No. Well, it defaults to always admit, which is disable admission, basically. As a step from here to there, I'm completely fine having the disable admission flag and default it to true, with a warning that in the release notes, next release we plan to default to false.
Just as a general question, to what extent do we want cluster administrators explicitly managing their admission plugins versus us doing as much of that as possible for them?
OpenShift has a pretty considerable amount of experience in the area. We've been managing a default list for users since our 3.0, which corresponded to Cube 1.0. And what we found is that a user may wish to enable something extra or disable something in particular, but only if he's looking for it. So if he wants an alpha feature, he might go to turn on his alpha feature, right? His alpha feature submission plugin. But there are a lot of cases where the admission plugin is paired with another feature and is required to make something safe or to make it work as expected. And pod tolerations is a good example there. Where if you don't control what tolerations are allowed, your taints on your nodes aren't doing what you think they're doing. And so with a fairly known list of included admission plugins, and we control those fairly tightly, I think we could do a very good job of choosing what to enable and what to disable.
Yeah,
but
I don't think I disagree with any of that. I am a little worried about the usability of the API server command line flags. I think they're not very usable right now, and I don't want something else that's as bad as like runtime config, for example.
Yeah. So this is a little bit simpler than that. Actually, Tiger, I don't know if he's on this call, simplified a lot of the handling around runtime config. But
I did briefly look at the pull request, and I did notice that there weren't any documentation changes as part of it, like command line flag help strings. So
command line flags, they have been documented, but we haven't moved anything to the official documentation. This is, of course, outstanding, must follow up.
Yeah. Putting stuff in the official documentation is, obviously that is required, but I think you should also be able to figure out the behavior by just reading the command line flag. Oh.
It's just not part of this PR. It's already merged.
It's already okay. I thought that might.
So with the admission, with the default admission plugins, if I want to inject it or turn on an admission, but like because they're ordered, put it in a specific order. As a user, I would need to have context of which ones are default.
Yeah, so there's a list of default ones, and they are ordered now. And the UI is that you enable or disable just the single plugins you don't want or which you want in addition. So and the order is defaulted, so you cannot change it. Everything is automatic.
Yeah, so the correct order is baked in, and you're just deciding whether or not to run them.
Yeah, and that's because the developers really know what has to run in which order in order to have something that can change and input to a later piece.
Yeah, that's actually a huge improvement over the very confusing 2 orders in one command flag that we have right now. So yeah, I think I'm in favor of this, but it needs a release note. Okay,
we'll go forward with that then. Oh, and Frank, did that explain the question about ordering to you?
Yeah. So, but basically, you would lose the ability to reorder defaults, right?
That flag still exists if you really want to use it. It still exists for now. I would actually strongly encourage you not to use it. That I would say that if you're doing that,
yeah, if you have to use it, report a bug.
Yeah, something's going wrong.
I don't have to use it, thankfully, but I was just in an abstract sense, if there were users that were using it.
Yeah, I think we should deprecate that flag.
Maybe we should add a warning there saying when people use it, just file a bug with us, please.
I am fine deprecating and adding a warning. I wouldn't want to remove it for at least a year, though. It's definitely supported.
Yeah. Any further comments on this? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Stefan?
Yeah, so I linked the PR or the issue there. We came up with inconsistency in our CRDs. So we are claiming that CRDs are like native resources, and we realize that this is not true because we persist everything in the JSON blob a client sends, and people start to think about this additional properties flag in OpenAPI spec, where you can restrict what future future fields look like. For example, a field which is not defined, specified, can just be a string, for example. And this led to this insight that we do not strip unknown fields, although we could in CRDs. And the question is, do we want to make CRDs like our native API types and be serious about it? And all of this, of course, in the context that we make CRDs more serious with versioning and everything else.
I think the answer is yes. We want them to work like our native resources.
So there are a couple wrinkles to that. I commented in the pull request. The first is that we would only be able to do it if you have defined the OpenAPI schema for the validation feature, which is optional for custom resource definitions. I think that's an acceptable limitation, but it exists.
I think we're going to want to include that where applicable already. So I think if you don't add it, then you're not future proof.
So why can't that be part of the Open API spec, and by just specifying the additional properties equal to false?
I think that's.
Because then you don't have to use it in addition to the Open API spec, but it becomes part of the spec.
That's the idea. So it should be part. So you specify all properties, and those which are not there, they're just dropped. And it's doable with the Go API library, which we have with a little bit of extension. So
yeah. Oh, you know what? Actually, I see it. Okay.
Right, that feature is optional,
Yeah.
and so
Right.
I'm
Yes.
okay with that being a limitation. I just want to point out that it is a limitation. The other thing is that are we okay saying that you must list all the fields in the validation section that in where you define the schema? I think that I am. We do that effectively today. But I wasn't sure if anyone had comments like, no, if I turn this on for this kind of a field, it won't validate properly.
I think it's reasonable to, if you're submitting a validation, I think it's reasonable to request that the schema is complete. Like you're not submitting the validation to just validate a partial set of fields. You should at least list all the fields that you intend to set in the schema. I think, so I'm working on like a design for, if I ever get around to it, a design for moving kube control apply, like at least some part of it into the control plane. And I think for CRDs, to make apply work, you're going to have to supply a schema, and it will need to be complete. So, yeah.
Do you think there's an opportunity to create a generator for those in the future? Because it does get to be fairly like a couple thousand lines of evaluation stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we have all the pieces sitting around in our code base, right? So I think that's totally worthwhile. It's like give it a go struct and it'll generate your open API schema for your, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think I have need for it somewhere, but I didn't have time to look at it. But yes, we have all the pieces set.
So then the next question becomes, what are we going to do about backwards compatibility with what we have today? In order to be backwards compatible with what we have today, we would have to make this optional, and it would have to default to off.
Right.
But if we wanted to make a break here as one of those, we made a mistake in beta, we could make it not default, or we can make it non-optional and force it on. And if you have something bad in there now, it gets stripped later.
So the only people this would matter for is people who've already put in a OpenAPI spec, correct?
Yes. Sorry. If you said already put in bad data, then yes.
Well, it's already put in bad data, and they have to also have a OpenAPI spec in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it, but my tolerance is fairly high. It's data. It means you kind of did something wrong to begin with. So,
yeah, and really the net effect, like if we started enforcing this on intake, then data that's currently stored might still have these bad fields. I'm not sure how bad that is. So one thing I've been thinking about is generally having a storage. Yeah, actually, it's listed in my section down there. Having a component that makes sure the storage version for objects is correct. Because right now you change the storage version and it doesn't actually change anything in etcd unless people happen to read and write the object. I think that is the sort of thing that that mechanism could be used to fix this as well. Like if you turned this on and versioned your CRD, and then this component went and read and wrote all your CRDs, that would fix it. So I think
I'm just saying that I'm going to be able to share blame for this.
At a minimum, if we had that tool, we could then flip the default on this at this end, and then this tool could go and fix your data. Yeah, so I think I'm okay with adding it and maybe making it not default at the moment. I think it should be fixed for GA though.
Making it not default, meaning you would have it default to off. The feature would default to off.
Yeah.
It would always come on, and we would just always strip, because always strip is very predictable.
Yeah, I think the ideal setting is on. Like we should strip by default if you provided the OpenAPI spec, but we don't want to break people. Maybe this is something we could change over like we could change the default when we move from beta to GA. Maybe that's
Yeah, that's my impression as well.
yeah. So in beta default off, warn people, and in GA default on.
And definitely warn people if they're already having bad objects.
Yeah.
And they access them, just add a warning to the logs.
We do not validate on reads.
No, we don't validate on reads, but we can still warn people, like even if they've chosen not to strip, we can still warn people that when we go to GA, we're going to start stripping by default, and your object is going to be modified in a way that maybe you don't expect.
Are we modifying their object, or are we just failing the validation on writes?
If we're stripping fields,
modifying.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I think I can live with that. Devil's in the details of that change in defaulting. We've done it in OpenShift. I don't know if I've seen it done in Q.
I have a quick question. Why do we want to strip objects automatically rather than just returning validation errors?
It's the semantics of the native APIs as well. We just ignore unknown fields.
Okay.
And we just want to follow that for CDs as well.
Yeah, it's in large part because of the way the JSON decoder works.
Okay, thanks.
If someone wanted to take that on and fix it, there's been something around since pre 3.0 for, gee, I wish you didn't strip my fields.
Is this consistent with how like native Kubernetes resources work?
Yes, it is. And we actually make use of this ability when upgrading pieces, right? So if you add a field and you want to make sure that no one was squatting on that field before, right? So if you had a field that says, let me do super awesome privileged thing, you want to be sure when you upgrade your server to start using that new version that no one has already set that field to true. And so by stripping fields in advance, you sort of got that for free. Does that make sense?
All right. Any more comments on unknown fields and CRDs? All right, let's go on to the validation design.
So I can give you guys a brief introduction, and then we can talk on the things that we have.
This is the versioning design, right?
Yes,
this is the versioning.
CRD versioning. So basically, the idea of I said validation. Sorry, the CRD versioning design that we decided that's the good way to go is using webhooks for converting old CRDs to new ones. There are two points of conflicts there, as I see in the comments that people have there. One is reusing the existing webhook APIs and implementation. I think people don't have any problem with the implementation part, but there are oppositions to using the same API that we're using for other webhooks, like mutating and validating for conversion webhooks. Ideas against this is they're completely different things, they have different configuration and different payloads. And people that think it's a good idea, and I'm still one of them, is I'm thinking that it's a good idea to let people that writing validation and mutating webhook to also use the same thing to do the conversion.
So I haven't read the discussion, but because it happened and I'm still digging out from a huge email backlog. So I haven't read it, but my hope for this was that we can combine, like the majority of the time, we can combine the validation call with the conversion call and only make one webhook call.
I don't think that's going to be the case, right? So if you think about when conversion is going to be called, well, actually, I guess we did take that out of webhooks. Conversion is going to get called on read, right? And validation, I don't think should be called on read.
I agree with that. So They can't do exactly the same thing, but I would like it to be at least be possible on the right path to not have.
So all right, if we talk about using, if you talk about using admission webhooks to do validation on custom resources, which I think is a good idea, the semantic of what a mutating webhook does not include the ability to change the storage version or to return a completely different kind of object. If you look at what conversion needs to do, conversion needs to be able to do those things.
I agree. It would be a difference from what we're doing today, but it doesn't have to be a difference that affects current webhooks.
I don't. So if you look at what the differences are between these APIs, they are about 90% different, right? Like if you look at the fields, there are, I enumerated many in there. We can go through the list, but basically no field matches between what admission does and what conversion logically does, right? Conversion.
No, so I'm making the claim that I would like in our admission stack to just do the conversion at the same time, in which case the admission API would be a superset of the conversion API.
I don't think
you'd still have to do two calls, right? Because one, you're using a validating webhook configuration, and the other using a mutating webhook configuration. Now you can still do the validation in the mutating webhook, but then it kind of becomes confusing.
Is that true?
Yes, it's about timing.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But still, you can do validation in a mutating webhook. So
no, you can't. Not reliably, right? You can't enforce an invariant there because you cannot enforce the order there.
Yeah. Okay.
So what's the reason behind wanting to combine them? Is it to make less calls?
Yeah, it's to make fewer calls. Both for two reasons, really. Like it's fewer things that users have to implement to make this work, and it is fewer things in the call paths, reducing latency.
So I think that these are different concepts for users. Like a user can very reasonably want one and not want the other.
So there's another reason why I'm worried here, which is like, I don't know if you've heard the theory that there's only three numbers and they are 0, 1, and infinity. And I'm worried that we're moving from one webhook to infinity webhooks.
I guess I don't see one webhook really anywhere in our stack. Right, we started out, we already had two. We added a third. We're talking about adding a fourth. I'm okay with that. If we want to try to combine specific things for a custom resource specific webhooks, maybe. We only have one today. We could talk about what the next one would be. It would probably be something like defaulting. But I don't.
So defaulting is done during conversion usually. So
it is.
It's natural to do it also in the webhook.
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit here. I think we should really take no, it's confusing because of the read case.
Well, conversion happens on reads, so it's going to be a thing that's possible. I don't think that this
for people to misuse this and like actually make semantic changes to the object.
I think they'll almost certainly do that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty scary to me. Does it sound scary to you?
I still think that you'd actually end up with something easier to reason about if you keep one version of a custom resource. If we're going to do conversion, I think that webhook is probably the only thing that gives me the power that I want.
And I think, I mean, we don't guarantee round trips. We tell the developers to implement that properly, but we have no guarantee whatsoever. So we have to trust them anyway, and they will do wrong things. It's not trivial. So I don't think it's different to make mutations in conversion. Of course, it's possible, but we cannot forbid it.
If you give the ability to do conversion in the webhook, And since the admission webhooks are more broad, right? They're not just CRDs. Don't you give users the ability to do conversion on any Kubernetes resource and not just CRDs?
I don't think that it should be part of the admission API.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I think I'm
would-
tentatively convinced that these are two different functions, and even though it's going to suck both for users understanding it and for the number of calls the system has to make, I think I'm tentatively convinced that they should probably be separate systems. I don't know. Does anybody have more thoughts?
No, so the only other, so I do agree that for validation, it should be done by the admission controller, and then that conversion, maybe it's its own CRDs. I will play devil's advocate to my own argument that this is kind of, you're kind of mixing webhooks all over the place. Like, for example, if you just scope CRDs, it's like, well, if you're doing validation, we use the general one. If you're doing conversion, use the CRD specific one. And so while I think that's the correct approach right now, it would have to be heavily documented, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news there is that I don't think that there's any user that would say to themselves, you know what I really want to do? I want to own my own special conversion for how I convert between apps v1 and apps v1 beta 1.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't let people register.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think users will ever accidentally say, hey, this is the thing I want to do. Let me try to figure out how to do it. They'll probably say, gee, thank God I don't have to figure that out. So.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. All right. I want to think about it a little bit more, and we can follow up in the design, but I think you've mostly convinced me.
And the second
So
thing
the
is
second one, yeah, the second one is about maintaining the storage version.
Yes, there's the CRD controller.
And I just, I know you put some detail in your document about it, but I think it's a general problem that we need to solve for all APIs. So we should just make sure that the CRDs work the way our native resources work, so that when we solve this for everybody, CRDs take advantage of it.
Yep, and I think Stefan has an idea against it. Am I correct, Stefan?
Yes, I mean, my suggestion is to not, I mean, we won't have this mechanism for quite some time, for 1, 2, 3 versions. And if we design something now, should we let the developers of CRDs build this migration code? They will do it. They will touch and make a loop over all objects. So they implement that. Do we really want that? I wonder whether we can't just implement it now for CRDs. And I mean, it's better anyway in the beginning, so we can make experience with it.
I really don't want to write a controller that does this just for CRDs, because I think it's like exactly as hard to fix it for CRDs as it is to fix it for everything else.
I think Stefan was actually suggesting that you take another look at something like OADM migrate storage that we have in OpenShift that actually goes and updates all your storage versions for you.
Oh, you have this already?
We had it since 3.1. Yeah, we had 3 versions in 3.1. There was an issue where we linked you to the implementation. It is as simple as a read and write.
Right. Do you do this on a script, or is it a controller?
It's just a simple script.
Yeah. So we had a script, and it had a bunch of hard-coded resources in it.
Well, no, I think we discover based on discovery.
So you have an improvement on the script that we had? Okay.
Yeah, and then we have some bespoke logic for a few of the resources that didn't move easily. It can be not super hard to write. It's
So there's one reason why I also want to see that. If I delete, for example, the storage version, or just delete the version, and we clean up everything, at this time, this deleted version, it's still available in the storage, in the controller, so the controller sees that, but it's not writable anymore. So we need integration for that. So it's more than just having a controller and having the API extension server independently from that. It would be a much smoother experience if this is automatic. Like there's a condition that the controller is running, you can see it, and during this time, the version is gone already. And when the condition is true, the CID code, the operator code will see that and is happy.
And calling it a controller seems a little bit odd to me, just because I know how it works, right? Like if you interact at the API level, if you're interacting at the API level, you can't actually see the data stored in etcds.
Yeah. So I actually have a fairly detailed design doc that I haven't published on this. So it sounds like I need to publish it, and we should debate there whether the approach I have in mind is the right one, or if you have an easier one. I think I do want an approach that requires zero operational burden. So like,
I guess
running a script after you upgrade is not doesn't cut it for me.
Well, it does have the advantage of making sure that it completes and writes all the resources you expect.
So no, it doesn't really, because what if the script craps out halfway through? What if somebody aggregates an API? What if somebody changes the storage version?
If somebody aggregates an API, well, so let me go through those cases, right? So if somebody aggregates an API, the new API server will be storing at its configured storage version. When you upgrade that one, you have to run your script.
Right.
And you'll update. But once you've updated the server, since the storage version stays the same for the life of that server.
No, that's not a true assumption. You can change the storage version with a command line flag.
Well, so that command line flag is a mistake. It's a go shoot yourself in the foot button. I guess we disable it in OpenShift.
No, not really, because you might need to mess with that in order to do a safe roll forward, rollback.
Because of the way we version our objects, right? You always have an overlap, right? You introduce n, you introduce n plus 1 in the next release. Then the release after that, you can start storing at n plus 1.
Yes, that's the way it is supposed to work, but sometimes people make mistakes and you still need to recover and be able to do a rollback.
Well, we have tests now in place to make sure that nobody does make that mistake, right? That's what the etcd storage test is for. And it hasn't messed up in quite some time.
Well, we also haven't removed resource versions in a while. Does it test every
resource in the system? It uses discovery to find them all. It tries to write every resource. It reads etcd to see what version it was stored in. And any movement has to be explicit in that test, and someone has to have thought about it and made the change.
What if somebody adds a field or something?
Adding a field is allowed, right? Like the storage version overall can be read.
Okay, maybe I need to look at that and see if it would actually catch the problems I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So,
because I kind of suspect that it doesn't. Okay, so I think I need to publish. We basically talked about this. I need to publish my design, and we can continue this discussion there.
Okay, and last comment I have on CRD versioning is I kind of disappointed that in one day that I published this, nobody talked about the declarative conversion. I really like the idea. So the design I have there is really half-baked. I just want you guys to know, to just look at it. I don't want to see us in a position in a year say, oh, we should have went with the declarative approach. Just please look at that too.
So the next item I've added just because I've realized that there's a number of places where we're kind of close to some scaling limits. So I'll just, this is just a list of things that I'm thinking about, and if somebody has spare cycles and sounds interested, and one of these sounds interesting, you can ping me offline. But I'll just very briefly describe the problems. The first one on my list is node heartbeats, especially if you have a lot of images on your nodes or those images have a lot of names. Because etcd does copy on write every time the node's heartbeat, which is 10 times a second, it makes a copy of the entire node object. So if you do the math on 10 times a second times the number of nodes in your system times the number of images plus the number of image names, that quickly adds up to a great deal of data. So I don't know, we've been thinking about whether we can split off just the heartbeat field into a separate object, or maybe move it to a sub-resource, or maybe there's a change we can make to etcd to make this more efficient. I don't know. If that sounds interesting to somebody, ping me on Slack. And the next one, I know Wojciech already has a design, and maybe somebody is working on it, so maybe we don't need to talk about that one, but that is nodes currently poll for secrets and config maps. That's the bulk watch issue.
Someone did open a poll trying to prototype the design.
Yeah.
Also, node heartbeats 10 times a second. That sounds high to me. Does that sound high to you too, Stefan? I don't remember seeing that pop up in our profile.
No, don't think so.
It might be settable by flags, so maybe you have set it lower.
You ought to check it. If you're just talking about getting rid of the last check-in time, I could see making an adjustment.
Yeah, the node controller uses that data to decide whether the node is responsive or not. So
yeah, but I think either it doesn't show up in our profile or it is settable, and we've set it to something very different.
Okay, yeah, we can look into that. So next, object count quota. I dug into, Derek added, you can set quotas on object counts per namespace. I looked at that a little bit, and I think we need an additional layer, which is total number of objects in the system across all namespaces.
So in OpenShift, we built that. We built cluster resource quota. It allows you to count across either all namespaces or a subset of namespaces. It is not the most performant thing in the world, because in concept, quota is a global shared lock, right?
Yes.
I'm saying I would be very careful about doing it. We did it for a fairly narrow use case. If you'd like, I mean, obviously you can look, it's in OpenShift origin, but
okay. Yeah, I don't necessarily have, I'm not a huge fan of our quota system. Maybe there's ways that we could make it better. Like you can imagine sharding it, and each shard takes a lock just for that shard, and
yeah,
some of the quota, like you can imagine maybe.
Are you using this as a proxy for how big is my etcd?
No, I'm using this as a stop users from making the object that causes etcd to fall over.
Because etcd gets too big, you're saying?
etcd could either get too big or could get too big for the resources available. Right, you want users to get you don't have enough quota, request a quota increase message, instead of, you added the deployment that is making thousands of broken pods and causing your control plane to grind to a halt. Yeah,
I was just trying to think if I could think of an obvious spot to put that is somewhere else.
Yeah, I think we do need to. I think actually Joe added some metrics to etcd on like size and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we added a couple. I have to go back and look and see. I think it was mostly around the number of uncompacted things.
Yeah,
but I would be trying, if I were trying to protect myself against etcd getting too big, as opposed to trying to make sure that one particular set of projects didn't use too much aggregate CPU. If I were trying to protect myself from etcd being too big, I would try to look for something different than Quota. Different than Quota as it exists today, just scaled to cluster level. I would look for something else.
I mean, I'm open to revisiting our quota system. I think it kind of grew organically, and maybe a more principled thing could be better. I don't know.
It tried to fit inside of the constraints of where it was.
Yeah, and we have better, like we have
different spots.
Yeah, we have more options now. Yeah, so maybe we can make a better system. But I think, yeah, I think it would be useful to be able to track the quota over the whole cluster. Then the next one on my list is rate limits, back pressure. This is like the previous one is people making too many things. This one is people making those things too frequently, or making and deleting them too frequently, or just making too many calls in general. So I know we've definitely talked about this before, but I'm interested if somebody, I don't have great ideas on how to actually implement it. So if somebody does, please.
Do you have a set of requirements for this? Right, we have a couple different things in Cube now, right? We have an overall rate limit, we have a mutating rate limit, and we actually have a separate admission plugin that for events, because they're the most
Yeah, but I think the key thing to get right here is to limit different objects at different rates. So like if people are abusing the cluster, config maps should stop working before pods stop working.
Okay, I would be, if you made a design, I'd be interested in reading it and then seeing how it compared to things like the event rate limit admission plugin, which was focused and allows you to slice on per cluster, per namespace, or per user, or across any of the dimensions. Which,
yeah, and of course, any design, like we have to be able to handle enough traffic to tell people no. Yeah, I know Clayton has talked about back pressure before, so I don't know if maybe there's a design floating around that I'm just not aware of or anything.
we don't have anything more specific written, right? We've got the different levels in the API server, and then we wrote that admission plugin for events.
Okay, and then the next one is object storage version consistency, and we already talked about that. And the last one is something that we've been discussing a fair amount, which is the control plane version. It doesn't latch right now. If you are doing a rolling update of your control plane, you'll have some API servers at various versions, at different versions, which mean, and they're serving different versions of your APIs, and they have different flags. I think it's a similar problem to you add a CRD to the system, and then you don't know, like different API servers might be inconsistent for a little bit after you add that, and you don't know when they become consistent. And it's the same problem when you add an API service to the system. Different API servers might be, or different aggregators might be aggregating that differently for a little bit until it settles, and you don't know. And same if you do a flag flip, and if you roll out a flag flip. So there's a bunch of related problems that hopefully we can sort of have one mechanism to like list all the things that we want to latch and be able to safely roll out a change, and then have all the API servers flip at the same time, or you know, the same logical time. But I don't have, it's pretty complicated, and I don't have a design, so I'm just throwing out that this is a problem, and I'm sure there's already an issue, but yeah, if anybody has ideas, please. Okay, and last is, since it turned out to be more controversial than I was expecting, should we help users not do bad things with resource versions? I suggested just encrypting it. I thought that was a simple and low impact way to solve it, and apparently I'm the only one that feels that way.
So I have the basic questions. Why we don't want them to assume it's an incremental version?
Well, there's a bunch of things we don't want them to do with resource versions, such as comparing resource versions between two different collections.
Would you still, I mean,
That makes sense.
technically it's a string, right? So technically it's not directly comparable by converting to an integer and comparing on a single collection.
Yeah, I would,
Most
and
people do that too.
I also think we shouldn't allow people to compare them on single resources. I have sort of two reasons for that. One is it's kind of lazy and you can do whatever you need to do other ways. The other reason is it does tie our hands in terms of what storage systems we could eventually support.
Yeah, I
Right, you can imagine a system
we
that
tried to do this back in about, it was version 0.3, and that's when it became a string. Remember, it used to be an integer.
yeah, we made it a string. I think we should do more.
It didn't work, so I think we're stuck with it.
So does anyone have a problem with at least making it a flag thing that you can enable or disable?
I need to think about that. I'm not comfortable saying yes right now because I really feel like that ship has sailed.
I agree with David. I feel like you can't take it back now.
We can't hear you.
I said, I think I agree with David because I don't feel like you can take it back anymore.
I mean, we do document that you shouldn't be doing this to the resource version.
Yeah, it's one of those all observable aspects of an API become your API.
Yeah, which is why I would like to at least make it possible for people to test that they're doing it right.
I guess the question I would have is, what is doing it right? Like, what is the information you should be able to get from resource version, and what is the information that you should not?
The claim is that a resource version is an opaque string.
Yes.
That the only thing you can get out of it, is it the same or is it not the same?
Yes.
That
The only
greater than, less than.
Yeah, no greater than, less than. The only thing you're allowed to do with it is give it back to the API server. You get it from a list or a get, you give it back for a watch.
The thing is, as I recall, one of the first things that we built after we did this was we created a versioner struct that allowed greater than or less than comparisons in our code.
That doesn't, I believe that doesn't exist. The informers only use a comparison, or like equal operator. They don't use less than, unless somebody snuck that in when I wasn't looking.
Yeah, it's in the caching layer. It's called a versioner.
The caches use a version to determine if it's within the 1,000 or whatever.
The cache layer uses it inside API server.
Right, but I don't think any client would use it.
Yeah, I am not excited about doing it.
But maybe we could change that to a like is within window predicate, and allow the storage backend to tell us. I think that's a better way of handling that. So Jenny, in case you couldn't hear her, Jenny says that the caching layer inside API server does this in incorrect comparison, but
that doesn't surprise me.
I
remember making that, or not. I remember reviewing that interface a long time ago.
I think we can get down to the storage layer, and that's the proper place for that anyway.
All
right. Well, think about it. It's not critical, but I would like to give people the option. Okay, that's everything on our agenda. Any additional items? Actually, I think we're close to time anyway, so I'm going to say no additional items. Thanks for coming, everybody. We will do this again in 2 weeks.
All right. Bye, guys.
See you.